It was, by all appearances, the most civilized crime London had seen in years. The dinner gong at Ashcombe House had sounded precisely at 8 o'clock, its mellow bronze note drifting through the oak-panelled corridors like a summons to propriety itself. Guests, distinguished, scented, and impeccably dressed, were already assembling in the blue salon, admiring the late Lord Ashcombe's collection of Flemish miniatures and pretending not to assess one another with quiet, predatory interest. At 8:08, Sir Lionel Ashcombe was found dead. He lay not sprawled or grotesque, but seated, almost posed, at his writing desk in the library, his silk dinner jacket unruffled, his silver hair perfectly in place. One gloved hand rested upon a folded note. The other lay palm up, as though awaiting a coin. The fire was lit, and the curtains were drawn. The room was in order, and from the locked safe behind the portrait of Cardinal Richelieu, one object, singular, priceless, and notorious, had vanished. I confess, dear reader, that when I first beheld the scene, I thought less of murder and more of etiquette gone terribly astray. Captain Arthur Hastings, at your service, had been invited to Ashcombe House for what Sir Lionel called a gathering of agreeable minds and trustworthy friends. I had taken the phrase at face value. As events would soon demonstrate, this was my first error of the evening. The shriek came from Miss Eleanor Brooke, Sir Lionel's secretary, a young woman of admirable efficiency and unfortunate nerves. It sliced through the house with such force that even the footmen dropped their trays. I arrived at the library moments later, along with Lady Veronica Ashcombe, the widow, Dr. Matthew Crane, Mr. Julian Bellamy, and Colonel Rupert Fenwick. We stood, a small semicircle of disbelief, gazing upon the man who had hosted us scarcely an hour earlier. Sir Lionel Ashcombe was 62 years old, possessed of a brisk manner, a sharp tongue, and a fortune that made people listen when he spoke. He was also, this fact would prove significant, a collector of rare and controversial objects, several of which had been acquired under circumstances best described as legally elastic. Most famous among them was the polite thief's folio. The folio was a slim, leather-bound notebook dating back to the 1890s, reputedly belonging to an anonymous jewel thief who committed his crimes with exquisite courtesy. He sent thank-you notes. He returned borrowed umbrellas. He once left a bouquet of lilies for a woman whose diamonds he had stolen. The folio contained meticulous records of these crimes, names, dates, sketches of rooms, and, most tantalizingly, hints at accomplices who were never exposed. Collectors coveted it. Criminals feared it. Sir Lionel had paid a scandalous sum for it 6 months earlier, and now it was gone. The folded note beneath Sir Lionel's hand bore a single line, written in an elegant, old-fashioned script. With my sincerest apologies. No signature, no visible wound marked Sir Lionel's body. No overturned furniture suggested a struggle. The door to the library had been locked from the inside. The windows were latched. The servants swore no one had entered or left the room after dinner was announced. It was, in short, impossible. Inspector James Mallory of Scotland Yard arrived within the hour, a sturdy, practical man who believed deeply in fingerprints, footprints, and the universal guilt of human nature. He examined the room with growing irritation. "No weapon," he muttered. "No sign of forced entry, no missing items except the folio. If this is a murder, it's the politest one I've ever seen." At that precise moment, a small, fastidious cough came from the doorway. "Mon ami," said a familiar, measured voice, "that is because you are looking for violence where there is none." Inspector Mallory turned sharply. So did I, and felt an immediate surge of relief. There stood Hercule Poirot. He was immaculate, as always, patent leather shoes gleaming, moustaches waxed into perfect symmetry, his egg-shaped head inclined at an angle of mild disapproval, but he surveyed the room not as a policeman might, but as a man assessing a poorly arranged drawing-room. "Poirot!" I exclaimed. "What on earth—" "My dear Hastings," he replied, clasping my hands warmly, "when one is invited to stay with a man who owns the diary of the most courteous criminal in history, one does not refuse. Also," he added delicately, "Sir Lionel sent me a letter 3 days ago. He was, uneasy." "Uneasy?" repeated Mallory. Poirot nodded. He feared that someone wished to relieve him of the folio. But more than that, he feared admiration. "Admiration?" scoffed the inspector. "Yes, admiration," said Poirot softly. "The most dangerous motive of all." He approached the desk, not touching anything, merely observing. His eyes moved from the note to the corpse, to the safe concealed behind the portrait, now open and empty. "A theft," Mallory said, "and possibly a death from natural causes." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Natural?" he murmured. "Ah, no, this death is entirely artificial, designed, composed, like a piece of music." He turned to us then, the widow with her rigid poise, the doctor whose gaze lingered too long on the body, the friend who smiled a little too easily, the colonel whose knuckles were white with restraint, and the secretary trembling at the threshold. "Someone here," Poirot continued gently, "wished to commit the perfect crime, one that would offend no one, disturb nothing, and yet achieve everything." He gestured to the folded note. "Even murder," he said, "can be polite." And with that chilling observation, the affair truly began. Poirot's arrival altered the atmosphere at once, as though the room itself had drawn a careful breath. Inspector Mallory bristled, but he was a sensible man and did not object when Poirot asked that the body remain undisturbed a little longer. The servants were dismissed, the doors closed, and we found ourselves alone with the dead man and the ticking clock upon the mantel. Poirot did not hurry. He seated himself, smoothed his cuffs, and regarded Sir Lionel with an expression not of horror, but of mild reproach. "You see, Hastings," he said quietly, "order is a language. When it is spoken too perfectly, it lies." He asked Dr. Crane to confirm the time of death. The doctor complied, though with visible reluctance, stating that Sir Lionel had likely died shortly after leaving the dining-room. No sign of poison, no mark upon the skin. A peaceful passing, he suggested, perhaps brought on by excitement. Poirot inclined his head, accepting the words, while clearly not believing them. The folded note interested him greatly. He read it twice, then held it at arm's length, as though weighing its manners. "An apology implies a relationship," he observed. "One does not apologize to a stranger, therefore the thief was known to Sir Lionel, or believed himself to be." Lady Veronica sat rigidly upon a chair, her hands clasped. She spoke of her husband's enemies, of jealous collectors and unscrupulous dealers. Her voice was steady, yet Poirot watched her eyes, which flicked repeatedly toward the portrait concealing the safe. Julian Bellamy, lounging near the fireplace, offered charm in abundance and information in scarcity. He joked about Sir Lionel's dramatic tastes and dismissed the folio as a troublesome curiosity. The colonel said little, though his gaze never left Poirot's face. Miss Brooke, pale and shaking, confessed that she had prepared Sir Lionel's correspondence earlier that evening. Among the letters, she recalled, had been one written in an oddly formal hand, thanking Sir Lionel for his hospitality in advance. Poirot's eyes brightened. "You see, Hastings," he murmured, "even before the crime there was politeness." Inspector Mallory focused on the locked room. He tested windows, doors, hinges, growing increasingly frustrated. "If someone took that book, they vanished into thin air," he declared. "Or remained," Poirot replied softly. He rose and paced the room, noting the alignment of chairs, the precise placement of objects upon the desk. He stopped before the decanter of port. "Sir Lionel was right-handed, yes?" Dr. Crane agreed. "Then why?" Poirot asked gently. Is the glass placed for the left hand?" No one answered. Mallory frowned. Poirot continued. "And why does a man who prides himself on symmetry leave his portrait askew unless he wished someone to see what lay behind?" A silence fell, heavy and expectant. Poirot clapped his hands once, briskly. "For now, we do nothing," he announced. "We observe. We allow our thief to admire his own perfection." As we left the library, I could not shake the sense that the house itself was listening, every polished surface reflecting secrets. Poirot leaned toward me in the corridor. "The polite thief," he said, "was admired because he offended no one. Our criminal seeks the same applause. That vanity will betray him." Downstairs, the guests gathered uneasily. A constable stood at the door. Somewhere above us, the clock continued its patient counting. "I'm marking not merely seconds, but the narrowing distance between deception and truth." Poirot suggested tea, an absurdity that nonetheless restored a measure of civility. In the drawing-room, cups trembled in hands that claimed calm. Conversation resumed in fragments. Lady Veronica spoke of charity committees. Bellamy laughed too loudly. The Colonel stared at the carpet. Dr. Crane examined nothing and everything at once. Poirot listened, saying little, arranging sugar with reverent care. At length he addressed Miss Brooke, inquiring about Sir Lionel's habits. She spoke of schedules, of locked drawers, of his insistence that nothing be altered. "Except tonight," Poirot said softly. Tonight he invited witnesses. Inspector Mallory received a report from the constable. No one had left the grounds. Poirot smiled faintly. "And then our thief is still enjoying the hospitality." A servant brought the port bottle from the library, untouched. Poirot declined a glass, asking instead that it be placed before Dr. Crane. The doctor hesitated, then waved it away. A flicker crossed Poirot's eyes. "You see," he murmured to me. "Manners again. The refusal tells us more than the acceptance." The clock chimed the quarter hour. Poirot rose. "Soon," he said. "Someone will attempt to be helpful. When that happens, Hastings, watch the hands." I felt a curious chill, for his tone held certainty without explanation. The guests shifted, each newly conscious of gesture and glance. Somewhere a floorboard creaked, too deliberate to be chance. Poirot's gaze followed the sound, kind yet intent, as if encouraging a confession that had not yet found its courage. He folded his hands, a serene. The game, I understood, had begun in earnest, and every courtesy offered henceforth would conceal a calculation. In that house of perfect order, the smallest discourtesy would soon speak louder than any cry. Poirot caught my eye and nodded once, a promise rather than a signal, and I knew that before the night ended, politeness itself would stand accused, stripped of its mask and forced to answer. The truth waited patiently, perfectly mannered, and utterly without mercy for us all. Poirot sat as though the drawing-room were a theatre, and we all the actors, waiting for the cue that would betray our lines. The air had thickened with restraint. When young Parsons passed with fresh cups, Bellamy thanked him with such flourish that the boy blushed. Poirot's eyes rested on Bellamy a shade too long, then drifted away. But Inspector Mallory came back, shaking rain from his hat. "Two constables at the front, one at the servants' entrance. No one's going anywhere," he said. "Excellent," Poirot replied. "Then we may proceed without pursuit." Lady Veronica's composure cracked. "Proceed to what? My husband is dead. Are you to play parlour games while his murderer sits among us?" Poirot bowed. "Madame, we must think. But to make the guilty believe himself safe, one sometimes offers a game. I ask simple questions. You answer simply. It is polite." No one refused, though Colonel Fenwick's jaw tightened. Poirot began with the hour before dinner. Sir Lionel, Miss Brooke said, had worked in the library while she typed invitations for a forthcoming auction catalogue. At 7:30 he dismissed her to dress, and Lady Veronica confirmed she met him in the corridor at 7:40, brisk and almost cheerful. Bellamy claimed he had been in the smoking room with Fenwick, discussing sport. "Golf," Fenwick corrected at once. "Not polo." Poirot's head tilted. A small correction is sometimes a large anxiety. "And you, Doctor?" Poirot asked. "I was in my room," Dr. Crane said. "Preparing a tonic for Lady Veronica. She hasn't been sleeping." Poirot asked where this tonic was. Crane replied that it remained in his bag. Mallory grunted, as though filing the fact away, but Poirot merely nodded. Next came the library key. The footman, according to Miss Brooke, had locked the library after Sir Lionel entered, as Sir Lionel insisted on privacy. The key normally hung on a hook by the pantry. "Except tonight," Miss Brooke added.
Sir Lionel took it himself?" Mallory snapped. "Why wasn't that said before?" "I was not asked," she faltered. Poirot soothed her with a glance. "And did he say why?" "He smiled," she whispered. "He said, 'Tonight, Eleanor, I shall lock my own secrets.'" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Ah, the man arranged his own stage." Then the butler, Graves, entered with a silver salver. On it lay a second note, folded with care, found on the hall table near the telephone, placed as though awaiting discovery. Poirot unfolded it. Again, the manners. It read, "A small correction for the sake of accuracy. The folio was not stolen. It was returned." Mallory swore. "Returned to whom?" Poirot asked instead. "Who uses the hall telephone most often?" "Mr. Bellamy, sir," said Graves. Bellamy's smile faltered. "I rang my club."
"Hi, I didn't leave that." Poirot held the note up. "I did not ask if you left it, monsieur, yet you deny." Bellamy coloured. "It's absurd. Returned? Perhaps someone is playing a prank." "A prank that arrives with death," Lady Veronica said coldly. "And with my husband's book." Poirot leaned toward her. "From whom did Sir Lionel acquire the folio?" She hesitated. "From Mr. Sutherland, an antiquarian." Crane cleared his throat. "Sutherland is dead, heart failure last month." Poirot turned slowly. "You attended him, Doctor?" "I was called," Crane replied. "There was nothing to be done." Poirot went to the window, looking out at the wet gravel where lamps made small pools of gold. "Someone wishes us to believe the folio has gone back to its rightful owner," he said. "But the man named is dead. Unless the owner is not who we thought."
"Unless the folio was never truly Sir Lionel's to keep." Mallory's patience broke. "So what's your angle? We've got a dead man and an empty safe. Give me something I can arrest." Poirot smiled. "Not yet. But I can give you a direction. Our criminal does not flee. He performs. He leaves his gifts where they must be seen. Therefore something has changed since we left the library. We filed out behind him, and the house seemed to draw itself straighter, as if ashamed to be disorderly under Poirot's gaze. In the corridor, a constable hovered, uncertain whether to treat us as mourners or suspects. From somewhere above came a soft thud, perhaps a shutter settling, perhaps a footstep, too carefully placed. Poirot paused, listening, then resumed without looking at anyone. That silence was worse than accusation.
It had invited each of us to supply our own guilt. Mallory muttered about mere theatrics, but his hand went to his notebook all the same at once. Fenwick rose too quickly. Bellamy's fingers worried his cuff. Miss Brooke clasped her hands until the knuckles shone. Lady Veronica remained still, her gaze fixed on Poirot with fierce, contained hope. Poirot turned to Graves. "Bring me, if you please, Sir Lionel's acquisition ledger, the one in which he recorded each purchase, and also the key hook from the pantry." Graves blinked, but obeyed. While he was gone, Poirot said lightly to me, "The inspector searches for the invisible passage. I search for the visible habit. A locked room is solved by routine." Graves returned with the heavy ledger and, oddly, the little wooden hookboard itself, unscrewed from the wall. Poirot accepted both. "Merci. Well, now," he said, voice sharpening to a polite command, "let us pay another visit to our dead host. He has left us more instructions than you imagine." Poirot led us back to the library with the air of a man returning to a room that had offended him. The constable at the door straightened. Mallory flashed his warrant card. Inside, the fire had burned lower. Sir Lionel still sat at his desk, composed, his face waxen beneath the lamplight, the folded apology note where Poirot had left it. "First," Poirot said, "we restore the scene. Sir Lionel dines, he rises, he comes here, he locks the door himself, then he dies. The safe is opened, the folio is gone, and the door remains locked. It is the perfection that is suspicious." Mallory grunted. "And you'll tell me the perfection is arranged?" "By 2 persons, Poirot corrected. "Not all by 1 person who wishes us to think there are 2. He set the ledger on a side table and opened it with care. The pages were filled with Sir Lionel's neat hand, dates, sums, cellars. Poirot ran down the entries until he stopped and tapped it. 6 months ago, he murmured, the polite thief's folio, purchased from Sutherland, paid in full, delivered by hand. He looked up. Delivered by whose hand, Hastings? I couldn't say, I admitted. Miss Brooke, hovering at the threshold, spoke in a small voice. A man came, tall, grey coat, very courteous. He insisted on carrying the case himself. Sir Lionel was delighted. Poirot nodded. Courteous. Always the courtesy. And did Sir Lionel show him the safe? No, monsieur, but Sir Lionel joked he would keep it behind Richelieu, so that even thieves must ask permission. The man laughed, and he said, I always do. Poirot crossed to the portrait and examined the hinges, the little catch that released it. Now the safe, no scratches, no forced entry. That is because the safe was opened properly with the combination. Therefore someone knew it or acquired it tonight. Mallory said sharply, You think Sir Lionel told his murderer? Poirot's smile was thin, perhaps without knowing. He turned to the desk. Look, the port glass, still placed for the left hand. Sir Lionel was right-handed, so someone else placed it. Or Sir Lionel wished to suggest another presence. Dr. Crane shifted. If you imply, I arrange, Poirot interrupted. I compare. He lifted the hook-board Graves had brought. 3 brass hooks. One bore a faint bright mark where a key-ring had rubbed. Poirot pointed. The library key is supposed to hang here, yes, but the mark is on the left hook, meaning the key habitually hangs on the left. Yet tonight, Sir Lionel took it himself. Graves cleared his throat. Sir Lionel moved it last week, monsieur. He said the hook was too visible. Too visible? Poirot repeated softly. A man who fears visibility fears what it brings. Poirot approached the wastebasket beside the desk. Mallory had inspected it, but Poirot's hands remained behind his back as he looked. Empty, he remarked. For a man who writes notes, it is very empty. He went to the blotter. There, faintly, the impression of writing could be seen where pen had pressed on paper now removed. Poirot leaned close. "Hastings, the lamp." I adjusted it. Poirot studied the pale grooves. "An address," he murmured. "A time. And these loops. A woman's hand."
Or a man trained to mimic one." Mallory scoffed. "You can't read air." Poirot's voice remained calm. "I read intention. Someone wrote a note here and took it away. Someone wished to leave only the apology." He straightened and faced us. "Now we ask, who could remove a note from this desk after Sir Lionel died, without breaking the locked room?" Fenwick snapped. "No one could." Poirot's gaze rested on him. "Unless the room was not locked when we thought, or unless the key was already inside the lock and later turned." Mallory's head jerked. "Turned from outside? Impossible." "Not if the lock is jammed," Poirot said. He drew from his pocket a small pair of tweezers. With delicate precision, he reached toward the keyhole. A thin sliver of metal lay within, almost invisible. Poirot lifted it free. "A broken pin," he said.
Inserted to jam the bolt so it appears fast. Anyone with the key could enter, close the door, and it would seem secured. Later, one pulls the pin with a magnet and the key turns. Voila." Mallory stared, then swore. Quieter. "Who has magnets?" "Who has instruments?" Poirot asked mildly. "Who carries a bag with metal fittings? Who moves freely between rooms without being noticed?" Dr. Crane's face went a shade paler. "This is absurd." Poirot did not look at him. He looked at the doctor's bag on the chair. "Not absurd," Poirot said, "only too neat, and the person who loves neatness is not always morale." At that instant, from the corridor beyond the library, there came a sudden cry, high, choking, unmistakably, "Miss Brooks." We rushed out. She stood by the hall table, one hand pressed to her mouth, or with the other pointing at a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with white ribbon. On the ribbon, in that same elegant script, were the words, "For Monsieur Poirot, with my compliments." Poirot's eyes softened, almost affectionate. "You see," he said very quietly, "our thief watches us. He cannot resist." But he forgets, Hastings, that applause is heard both ways. When a man steps onto the stage, he leaves footprints, if not on carpet, then on conscience, always. The parcel sat upon the hall table like a deliberate insult disguised as a courtesy. No one touched it at first. Even Inspector Mallory, who had been eager enough to manhandle half the furniture in the library, hesitated as though the brown paper might bite. Poirot approached with the serenity of a man accepting flowers. "We must be careful," he said, not because he feared the object, but because he wished the guilty to see him fear nothing at all. He glanced at Mallory. "If you please, Inspector, your knife." Mallory produced it, grumbling. Poirot did not take it. Instead, he indicated the ribbon. "Cut here. Not the paper. We respect the wrapping. It is part of the message." The ribbon fell away with a soft, almost intimate sound. Poirot slipped 2 fingers beneath the paper, opened it as one opens a letter, and drew out a slim case of black leather. My heart gave a foolish leap. It looked precisely the right size for a notebook. Lady Veronica made a strangled sound. "The folio?" Poirot did not answer. He opened the leather case. Inside was not a book, but a small object wrapped in tissue, silver, oblong, and familiar in shape. Dr. Crane inhaled sharply. "A hip flask!" I exclaimed, and Poirot unwrapped it. On its side, engraved with painstaking elegance, were the initials L.A., and beneath them a motto, "Toujours correct, always correct." Sir Lionel's flask. I had seen him use it on a wet shooting day, laughing as he warmed himself with a discreet swallow. But why return it now at this hour with such ceremony? Poirot's expression remained mild, but his eyes were bright. He held the flask toward Mallory. "Smell," he said. Mallory complied, then stiffened. "Bitter almonds," he said slowly. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "How obliging of our criminal to send us perfume." "Cyanide," Mallory snapped. Poirot nodded. "Or something that wishes to be mistaken for it. Either way, it tells us Sir Lionel did drink from this tonight, and someone wants us to know." Lady Veronica's colour drained. "He did not drink at dinner?" He never—" "Not at dinner," Poirot agreed. "After, in the library, alone. Except not alone." Miss Brooke clutched at the back of a chair, but he dismissed everyone. "Dismissed," Poirot repeated gently, yet someone remained near enough to offer a small comfort. Mallory barked orders for the flask to be sealed and sent for analysis. Poirot let him, then turned to the gathered faces. "Our thief has played his second card," he said softly. "He implies poison. He implies the doctor. He implies perhaps that my little grey cells will follow the neat path laid before them." Dr. Crane's voice cracked with controlled anger. "Are you accusing me because I carry a bag?" Poirot looked at him with grave courtesy. "I accuse no one yet, Doctor. I observe that you are being accused by someone else."
And that the someone else enjoys the elegance of it. Colonel Fenwick muttered, "This is madness." "No," Poirot said, "this is vanity." He asked that we all return to the drawing-room. There, under the polite glow of shaded lamps, the atmosphere had become almost unbearable. Each of us felt the invisible string tightening around our throats, drawn by a hand that remained unseen yet intimately near. Poirot seated himself as before, and once again began to rearrange the sugar bowl with loving precision. It was a ridiculous gesture, and yet it steadied me. When Poirot fussed, it meant he was thinking. When he thought, chaos had an enemy. "Now," he said, "we speak of opportunity. Between dinner and the discovery of the body, who had access to Sir Lionel's flask?" Graves answered first. "It is kept in the cabinet in the library, monsieur."
"Sir Lionel himself took it out sometimes." "And tonight?" Poirot asked. Graves hesitated. "After dinner, Sir Lionel asked me to bring him the decanter of port to the library. I did so. He was alone." "Alone?" Poirot echoed. "And you saw him take the flask?" "No, monsieur." Poirot nodded. "Then the flask could have been used at any time earlier, perhaps even filled with something earlier. Who would handle it without being noticed?" Lady Veronica lifted her chin. "My husband's things were his own. I did not touch them." Bellamy laughed, too lightly. "Surely you're not suggesting Lady Veronica slipped poison into her own husband's toy?" Poirot's eyes went to Bellamy. "Monsieur Bellamy, you are very quick to offer suggestions I did not make." Bellamy's smile froze. "I only mean this is absurd." "Absurdity," Poirot said. "It is a mask we put on fear." Mallory leaned forward. "Poirot, you've got the note, the flask, the locked room trick. Give me a name." Poirot tapped the side of his cup. "Not yet, but I will give you another thing, a test." "A test?" Fenwick repeated sharply. "Yes," Poirot said, and the softness in his voice made it more alarming. "Our criminal wants to be known as polite, so we will offer him an invitation. We will see if he accepts." He rose and walked to the writing desk in the corner of the drawing-room where Lady Veronica usually composed her letters. He selected a sheet of thick paper, dipped the pen, and wrote briefly. Then he folded it, sealed it with a touch of wax, and handed it to Graves. "Place this," Poirot instructed, "upon the hall table where the parcel lay. Ensure everyone may see it. Then we wait." Graves looked startled. Or what does it say, monsieur?" Poirot smiled. It says only what our thief cannot resist, that I admire his style, that I am grateful for his assistance, and that if he wishes to discuss the folio, he may do so in the library at midnight. Lady Veronica sprang to her feet. Midnight? You would lure him here. I do not lure, Poirot corrected. I offer courtesy. A polite thief cannot refuse a polite invitation. Dr. Crane said harshly, and if he comes, he may kill again. Poirot's gaze settled on the doctor, gentle as velvet over steel. If he comes, doctor, he will come not to kill, but to be recognized. The clock on the mantel chimed the half-hour. Outside, rain dragged its fingers along the windows. Inside, every mind in the room counted the minutes to midnight, and every face wore a different version of the same expression, the knowledge that the next act had already been written, and that someone among us held the pen. Poirot's sealed note lay on the hall table like a dare in cream paper. Graves set it down with exaggerated care, and the house settled into a strained imitation of normality. Inspector Mallory posted men discreetly, one in the corridor by the library, another near the stairs, a third outside in the rain-darkness where the gravel path led to the gate. Poirot insisted we behave as usual. Coffee replaced tea, a tray appeared and went untouched. Lady Veronica sat rigid, hands clasped. Bellamy tried twice to speak, failed, and fell into silence. Fenwick prowled to the window and back. Dr. Crane opened his bag, closed it, and opened it again, as though the click of the clasps might prove something. I felt a foolish urge to hunt for secret panels and hidden doors, anything to make the mystery physical and therefore manageable. Poirot, by contrast, watched faces. Now and then he asked a question so small it seemed pointless. Who took sugar? Who disliked the draught? Who had heard the clock strike 9? Each answer slid into his mind like a card into a drawer. Near 11, Miss Brooke returned from Sir Lionel's study with a bundle of letters tied in red tape. Her fingers shook so badly she nearly dropped them. Poirot accepted the bundle, thanked her, and sorted quickly. There, he said, selecting one. The letter Sir Lionel received 3 days ago, thick paper, formal hand, no return address, only a London postmark. Mallory leaned over. Read it, Poirot obliged. Sir Lionel, I am delighted you have appreciated the folio. I shall be in the neighbourhood soon and would enjoy the honour of a short conversation. Courtesy requires I warn you, what was taken may one day be returned. He looked up. You see? Even in advance. The theme. Lady Veronica's voice was sharp. Sir Lionel laughed. He said whoever wrote it was either mad or a blackmailer. And did he reply? Poirot asked. Miss Brooke nodded. He dictated a note, brief. I typed it, he signed it, and told me to place it with the outgoing post. But it was not posted, Poirot said softly. Therefore it remained accessible. Who handles the outgoing post? Graves answered from the doorway. I do, sir. Poirot's eyes drifted to the silver inkstand. And who polishes the silver? Parsons, the young footman, flushed. I do, sir. Poirot nodded once, as if confirming a measurement. Then he went to the mantel clock and studied it with unexpected gravity. The clock is punctual, he murmured. Yet earlier we spoke of about 8:10. A thief loves about. It is a soft place to hide. At 5 minutes to midnight, Poirot suggested we all go to our rooms, except we did not. We dispersed only into places chosen with care. Mallory and his men waited in the shadowed corridor outside the library. Fenwick lingered near the stairs, pretending to search for a book while watching the hall. Bellamy drifted toward the smoking room, cigarette unlit. Lady Veronica remained in the drawing-room with me, though she pretended to read. Dr. Crane stood by the sideboard as if guarding it. Poirot alone moved naturally, like an ordinary guest. He paused at the hall table, examined his own sealed note, and smiled faintly, almost tenderly, as though he greeted a friend. Then very softly, the front door handle clicked. The sound was small, but in that silent house it was thunder. Mallory's men stiffened. Poirot did not startle. He walked toward the vestibule with unhurried steps, and I followed, my heart hammering. The door opened inward. A figure stood on the threshold, rain beading on a dark coat. He removed his hat with immaculate politeness, revealing neatly combed hair and a pale, composed face I did not recognize. In his gloved hand he held a closed umbrella, as though he had come to call at a respectable hour. "Bonsoir," he said mildly. "Monsieur Poirot, I received your invitation." Mallory stepped forward. "You'll come with me?" "Of course," said the stranger without protest.
But first, courtesy." He drew a small parcel from inside his coat and set it on the hall table beside Poirot's note. "This belongs here." Poirot inclined his head. "You are punctual." "I try," said the stranger. "The polite thief would be ashamed of tardiness." Poirot's voice was gentle. "And yet you have made one discourtesy." The man's smile wavered. "What is that?" "You came through the front door," Poirot said, "when a man who wished to remain unseen would use the servants' entrance. Therefore you wish to be seen. That is not the act of the true culprit. It is the act of a messenger." Mallory seized the man's arm. The stranger only sighed, disappointed, and allowed himself to be turned toward the corridor. "Messages," he said, "can be more dangerous than knives." Poirot's gaze went back to the parcel. "Open it."
"Or Hastings," he said quietly. "But do not touch what is inside with your hands." I swallowed, peeled back the paper, and found the leather folio at last, its corners worn, its clasp intact. On top lay another folded note, written in the same courteous hand. It said, "The book is returned, the truth is not. Look to the woman who writes like a man." Behind me I heard Lady Veronica's breath catch, and even Mallory paused. The house seemed to tilt, as if the ink itself had shifted the floorboards. The note lay like a drop of ink on snow, staining every mind in the hall. Mallory's grip tightened on the stranger's arm, but the man only lifted his chin, affronted by the roughness rather than the arrest. "You will tell me your name?" Mallory demanded. "Leonard Voss," the stranger replied. "At your service."
"I run errands for gentlemen who prefer not to knock." Poirot read the message again. "Look to the woman who writes like a man," he murmured. "A charming thrust. It points, but does it prove?" "No." Lady Veronica's voice cut the hush. "This is vile. Who dares suggest—" Poirot raised a hand. "Madame, we will not allow the murderer to arrange even our suspicions." Yet his gaze flicked very briefly to Miss Brooke, white as paper, her fingers pressed together until they trembled. She met his eyes and looked away at once. Mallory hauled Voss into the drawing-room, where everyone could be watched. Poirot followed with the folio under his arm and set it on the lamp table. "Do not open it," he told Mallory. "The whole house is turning inside out over this book, and you won't open it?" Mallory snapped. "The folio is bait," said Poirot. The true fish is not in the net yet. If we tear the bait, we lose the hook." Voss sat, crossing his legs with rehearsed ease. "I can save you trouble. I never saw Sir Lionel alive. I met a lady at Charing Cross, veil, gloves, the voice educated. She handed me the parcel and told me to bring it here at midnight sharp and to present myself openly. She said Monsieur Poirot appreciates manners." "A lady," Mallory repeated. "Name?" Voss smiled. She did not give it. She gave me money, very polite. Poirot leaned forward. Did she write the note? She wrote something on a card, Voss admitted. I did not read it. But you noticed her hand. Small, controlled, like someone who signs checks. Lady Veronica rose. Anyone could hire a messenger. Just so, Poirot agreed. Therefore we examine not the messenger, but why he is sent. This in our criminal throws light in one direction and shadow in another. Dr. Crane spoke with forced steadiness. You think the murderer is Miss Brooke? Miss Brooke gave a tiny sound and swayed. I caught her elbow. No, no, she whispered. Poirot's voice was gentle. Mademoiselle, do not faint. Fainting is for the guilty and the theatrical. You are neither. The words steadied her. She straightened, blinking hard. Poirot turned to the butler. Graves, fetch the outgoing post tray. Also the correspondence Miss Brooke typed this afternoon. Graves hurried away. Mallory watched him go, suspicious now of everyone. While we waited, Poirot studied the folio's worn leather and clasp. The polite thief recorded facts, he said softly. But our murderer records feelings.
That is why he cannot stop writing. Graves returned with a wooden tray and a bundle of letters. Poirot asked Miss Brooke to find Sir Lionel's reply. Her hands shook as she pulled it free. A short note, signed in Sir Lionel's bold hand. Poirot compared it to the anonymous letter, then to the apology note, and finally to the message that came with the folio. He used no glass, only his eyes. The rhythm, he said to me. Not the shapes, but the breathing between them. The anonymous letter is too careful, like a person holding his breath. The apology note is freer, as if the writer enjoys the act, and this last message, it is written with impatience. Mallory snorted. You can tell impatience from ink? Yes, said Poirot simply. Impatience makes the pen press harder on certain strokes.
There is a fingerprint of temperament. He looked around the room. Who among us becomes impatient when watched? Bellamy laughed sharply, too quickly. Fenwick's eyes narrowed. Lady Veronica's face remained set, but a pulse beat at her throat. Dr. Crane's fingers tightened on his bag clasp until the knuckles whitened. Poirot's gaze returned to Miss Brooke. Earlier you said Sir Lionel told you to post his reply, did you? Yes, she said hoarsely. I did. Poirot lifted the tray. And yet it is here, unposted. Why? Miss Brooke stared as if struck. Because I forgot. With dinner, and then... Poirot's voice softened. Or because you were told not to post it. By whom? Her lips parted. Then she whispered, By Sir Lionel himself. He called me back. He said he wished to keep it.
He was afraid it would provoke. Provoke whom? Poirot asked. Miss Brooke's eyes filled. He wouldn't say. Only that the person had a talent for politeness and a rage for being admired. Poirot nodded once, as if a hidden piece had clicked into place. Merci, mademoiselle. That rage is now in this room. Voss, still seated, gave a small laugh. In this room? Then why am I here at all? Because you are convenient, Poirot replied. A decoy with ribbon. Decoys are useful. They show who is pleased and who is not. Mallory muttered orders to his men. Poirot instead went to the writing desk, wrote a few lines, folded the sheet, and slipped it into an unsealed envelope. Hastings, take this to Sir Lionel's bedroom and place it on his pillow, he said softly. If anyone asks, you are lost. And then? Then we see, said Poirot. Who cannot resist reading one more letter tonight. I obeyed, though my stomach tightened at the thought of climbing those shadowed stairs alone, while the murderer, if murderer there was, sat comfortably downstairs sipping coffee. The The corridor smelled faintly of beeswax and damp wool. Behind me, the drawing-room murmured with restrained voices and the occasional sharp note of Mallory's impatience. Ahead, the stairs rose like a dark ribbon, each step creaking a protest that sounded, in the silence, like accusation. Sir Lionel's bedroom lay at the far end of the west passage. A maid's lamp burned low outside the door, casting a puddle of light on the carpet. The knob turned easily. In that house of locks and secrecy, this room had been left open, perhaps because death had already taken its owner. Inside, the air was close, too heavy with cologne and extinguished fire. Sir Lionel's bed was turned down, the sheets crisp, as though waiting for a man who would never return. I crossed to the pillow and placed Poirot's envelope precisely where he had instructed. It looked absurdly innocent, a pale square against the white linen. As I turned, I noticed something that had not been there earlier. A small silver dish on the dressing table containing 2 cufflinks. They were shaped like tiny masks, one smiling, one frowning. I picked them up, then thought better, and set them down again. Everything in that house now felt like evidence. I had taken 3 steps toward the door when I heard it, the soft scrape of fabric in the corridor, followed by a pause too deliberate to be chance. I stopped. My heart beat so loudly I was certain it could be heard.
A shadow crossed the strip of light beneath the door. I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, the latch clicked gently from the outside, as if a hand had tested it and found it already open. I stepped back, and the door swung inward. Miss Brooke stood there. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glistening, and she held a candle in a trembling hand. For an instant she looked not like a conspirator, but like a child afraid of the dark. "Hastings," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" I tried for casualness and failed. "Poirot asked me to place a letter." Her gaze darted to the bed, to the envelope. The candle flame wavered, throwing nervous shadows across her cheeks. "A letter," she repeated, and there was a sharpness beneath the fear. "You shouldn't be wondering," I said. "Mallory will—" She stepped inside without answering, the candle held close as though it could shield her. Her eyes fixed on the envelope like a magnet finding metal. "Miss Brooke," I said more firmly, "Poirot will not like it if I read it." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Why should he leave it where anyone can read?" "Perhaps," I said cautiously, "because he wants to see who tries." The colour drained from her face as if I had struck her. She swayed, and I caught her elbow again. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't understand. That letter, if it is what I think—" She broke off, swallowing hard, and then, to my astonishment, she moved past me and took the envelope. Her fingers hovered, then tore it open with a speed that was not trembling at all. She pulled out the paper, scanned the lines.
Howland made a small sound, not of relief but of fury. Poirot's trap had sprung. "What does it say?" I demanded. She thrust it toward me. The handwriting was Poirot's, neat and small. "To the person who values courtesy above truth, you have been most obliging. Return now the second note taken from Sir Lionel's blotter, and the matter may yet remain correct." Beneath it, Poirot had drawn, with almost playful precision, a tiny moustache. Miss Brooke crumpled the paper. "He thinks I took it," she hissed. "He thinks I—" "You did take it," came Poirot's voice from the corridor, soft as velvet. Miss Brooke froze. I spun around. Poirot stood in the doorway, alone, his expression mild, his eyes bright with that terrible kindness that made one feel both comforted and exposed. Behind him, the corridor was empty. He had come without escort, as though he feared no ambush. Mademoiselle, he said gently, do not be angry with me. Be angry with the one who used you. Miss Brooke's lips trembled. I didn't kill him, she whispered. I didn't. I swear it. I know, Poirot said simply. The certainty in his tone broke something in her. Tears spilled, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. He made me, she gasped. Sir Lionel made me. He dictated the note. He did. The one on the blotter. He wanted it removed after he was gone. Poirot stepped closer. What note, mademoiselle? She shook her head wildly. He said if anyone saw it there would be scandal, ruin. He told me to take it when the time came and to give it to... Her voice faltered. To Lady Veronica. My breath caught. Lady Veronica? Miss Brooke nodded miserably. She was waiting outside the library when I found the body. She looked at the desk first, not at him. She whispered, Is it there? I didn't understand. Then I saw the impression on the blotter, and I panicked. I tore off the top sheet and hid it in my folder. Later, in the confusion, I meant to give it to her, but Poirot was always watching. Poirot's eyes did not leave Miss Brooke's face. And did you give it to Lady Veronica? No, she whispered. I never had the chance. Someone took it from my room after. I thought I'd imagined it, but the folder was opened. Poirot nodded slowly. So the note exists, and now it is in the hands of someone who fears it. That is why our criminal writes riddles about a woman who writes like a man. He turned to me. Hastings, do you see? Our murderer is not merely killing for a book. He's killing to prevent a letter from being read. A step sounded behind us, light, controlled, and unmistakably feminine. Lady Veronica stood at the end of the corridor in her dressing gown, a shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, her face composed as a marble. I wondered, she said softly, when you would come to my husband's room. Lady Veronica's voice was calm, but the calm had edges. In the weak corridor light her eyes looked too bright, as if sleeplessness had polished them. She stopped a few paces away, holding herself like a statue that had learned to breathe. Poirot bowed, as though she had entered a drawing-room rather than a passage outside a dead man's bedroom. Madame, he said, you have excellent timing. It is a talent shared by our criminal. You send my husband's secretary upstairs with a letter and wait for the trap to spring, she replied. Very clever. I do not send, Poirot said gently. I invite. People choose. Miss Brooke made a choked sound. Lady Veronica, Be quiet, Lady Veronica said, not raising her voice, yet striking like a whip. You have already spoken too much tonight. Poirot's head tilted. There is a letter you wanted, madame, a note Sir Lionel wrote and did not wish to be seen. Why? Lady Veronica's gaze slid past him to the bed within the room. Because it was not your business. Ah, Poirot murmured, but now it is the business of murder. She did not flinch. You have no proof he was murdered. I have proof, Poirot said softly, that someone wished his death to appear natural. I wished the room to appear locked, wished suspicion to fall where it would be convenient. Those are not the wishes of nature. What do you want from me? She asked. The truth, said Poirot. And the missing note. Lady Veronica looked at Miss Brooke with cold contempt, then back to Poirot. There is no missing note. Eleanor is hysterical. I am not, Miss Brooke burst out. You asked me, outside the library. You said, is it there? You didn't look at him. You looked at the desk. Lady Veronica's eyes flashed. Because I knew my husband. He collected secrets. When he died, I feared what he had left behind. Poirot nodded. So you admit you expected something? I expected scandal, she said sharply, He had enemies, lawsuits, women. When he died, and I expected ruin to crawl out of his papers. And you wished to stop it before it crawled, Poirot said. Understandable. But someone else wished to stop it by killing. Lady Veronica's mouth curved into a bitter smile. Then name him. The doctor with his medicines, the colonel with his temper, the charming friend with his lies, the servants with their keys. And the widow, Poirot said quietly, with her need to keep her world intact. Careful, she whispered. Poirot did not move. Madame, you did not take the note from Miss Brooke. If you had, you would be burning it now, not walking these corridors. Therefore someone took it first, someone who fears what it says. Rain tapped the window at the end of the passage like impatient fingers. Poirot called softly, Inspector Mallory. Mallory emerged from the shadows near the stairs, a revolver low. 2 constables followed. I'm here, he said. Didn't fancy letting you wander alone? Poirot inclined his head. Inspector, Lady Veronica is not under arrest, not yet, but I ask that she remain with us. Also, search Miss Brooke's room at once, carefully, for a torn sheet of paper. Lady Veronica's colour drained. You will ransack my house? Your husband's house, Mallory said, and now a crime scene. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you tell me what Sir Lionel feared to write, you help yourself. If you conceal it, you help the murderer. He is counting on your pride. For the first time, her composure cracked into raw anger. He wrote that the folio was stolen, she hissed. Not from him, from someone else, from me. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Explain. Lady Veronica swallowed. Before I married Lionel, my father kept papers, names, bribes, disgrace. That book was among them. Lionel took it and said he was protecting me. Then he turned it into a trophy and bought enemies with it. He meant to leave a confession where I would find it, as if politeness could absolve. Poirot's voice was very quiet. So someone feared that confession would point to them. Or feared it would destroy me, she snapped. Poirot looked at her with pity edged in steel. Madam, the murderer is not protecting you, he is using you as a shield. A constable came running up the stairs. Inspector, there's something in Miss Brooke's room, in the wastebasket, burnt paper but not all ash. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Then our criminal has been busy while we speak. Inspector, gather everyone, at once. The time for polite notes is finished. And now we have only the truth to deliver, and it will not be gentle. Mallory barked orders, and the corridor filled with boots and hurried whispers. Lady Veronica stood very still, as though movement would make her confession real. Miss Brooke clutched my sleeve, shaking. Poirot turned to her. You will come too, mademoiselle. You have been frightened into silence long enough. Together we descended the stairs. In the hall, the folio lay where I had set it earlier, like a silent judge. From the drawing-room came the low murmur of voices, Fenwick's clipped impatience, Bellamy's strained laughter, Dr. Crane's careful silence. Poirot's eyes narrowed, listening as one listens for the wrong note in a melody. Yes, he murmured, almost to himself. Assemble them all. The murderer is already among the audience. And he thinks the performance is his. He opened the drawing-room door and stepped inside now. The drawing-room seemed smaller with everyone herded into it, as if the walls had crept closer to listen. Inspector Mallory stood by the door with 2 constables, a clumsy barricade of authority. Colonel Fenwick kept to the hearth like a man guarding a redoubt. Julian Bellamy perched on the arm of a chair, too casual to be sincere, an unlit cigarette worrying between his fingers. Dr. Crane remained beside the sideboard, his medical bag at his feet. Poirot did not begin at once. He crossed to the mantel, adjusted the clock until it sat perfectly square, and only then turned, hands folded. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, "tonight we have been offered a crime that prides itself on courtesy. Notes, parcels, punctual arrivals. But politeness is not innocence. It is only a glove, and a glove may hide many things." Mallory's voice was rough. "Get to it, Poirot." "In good time, Inspector. First, the death. Sir Lionel did not die of nature. He died because he drank from his own flask after dinner. Someone had placed within it a substance that stops the heart quickly and quietly. The scent of bitter almonds was a flourish meant to point your finger at cyanide and therefore at the doctor. But the flourish was theatrical, not scientific. Dr. Crane's jaw tightened. "You have no laboratory proof." "I have the motive of the writer," Poirot replied. "A man who sends perfumed evidence wants to be admired for cleverness. Now, the locked room. A thin metal pin jammed the bolt so the door appeared fast. Later, with a magnet, the pin could be removed and the key turned. Or that required someone who could move in corridors without remark, someone for whom tinkering would look like habit." Mallory's eyes drifted to Crane's bag, and Bellamy's laugh cracked out. "So it's the doctor after all." Poirot's gaze slid to him. "You laugh because you wish suspicion to settle anywhere but on you, monsieur." Bellamy's smile faltered. "Me? I haven't touched a thing." "You touched words," Poirot said mildly. "You offered answers before questions. You corrected others to sound certain. You steered the room with charm. The polite thief's admirers call that style. I call it direction." Fenwick muttered, "And the folio?" "I do not forget," Poirot said. "The folio returned because the folio was not the true objective. It was a curtain. Behind it was the note on Sir Lionel's blotter, the one he meant for Lady Veronica. But Miss Brooke removed it at Lady Veronica's request, not from malice but from fear. Then someone stole it from Miss Brooke's room and tried to burn it. A fragment survived. On that fragment were two words the flame could not entirely eat: Julian and ledger. The room went still. Lady Veronica's head turned, slow as a clock hand. "Julian?" Bellamy straightened. "This is absurd." Poirot inclined his head. "Sir Lionel learned that the folio once belonged to your father, madame. He took it, believing he protected you, then displayed it as leverage. But he learned also of a young man once employed to retrieve inconvenient papers with impeccable manners, a man who apologized while he stole and kept a ledger of favors." Bellamy's voice rose. "You're telling fairy tales about me being some legendary thief?" "Not legendary," Poirot said. "Human. You knew the hall telephone, the arrangement of the safe, the way Sir Lionel liked his notes folded. You could hire Leonard Voss to arrive at midnight and play messenger while you sat among us, watching whether your performance pleased." Mallory took a step forward. "Bellamy, stand!" Bellamy stood smoothly like a host rising to toast. "Even if I wrote pretty notes, that doesn't make me a murderer." "What makes you a murderer," Poirot said, "is impatience." Sir Lionel wrote to confess. He wrote that you used the folio as a ledger of polite extortion, names, debts collected with smiles. He wrote that you returned the book now not from conscience but because he had you cornered. You could not allow that letter to be read, so you came after dinner, offered him his flask as comfort, and watched him drink. Bellamy's eyes glittered.
"Yeah, you cannot prove I was in the library." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Ah, but you proved it when you corrected the Colonel. You said you were with him discussing polo. The Colonel said golf. A trivial mistake unless you were not there at all." "Colonel Fenwick was in the smoking room alone," You arrived later and invented company, and when you invented it, you chose horses because your mind was already in the stable of old crimes. Fenwick's face flushed. I was alone, he admitted. I didn't say because it sounded suspicious. And that, Poirot said, is how the innocent help the guilty by fearing appearances. Mallory's hand went to his cuffs. Bellamy looked at the door, at the constables, at the window. For one breath I thought he would bolt. Then he smiled very softly, and the smile had no warmth. You're good, Poirot, he said.
Aye, but you've forgotten the first rule of polite society. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Which is? One never makes a scene, Bellamy replied, and his hand dipped into his pocket. In the same instant, Poirot moved, fast, decisive, snatching the unlit cigarette from Bellamy's fingers. A thin needle slid from its paper seam and clinked onto the rug, shining like a polite little sting for all. Mallory's men surged forward, but Poirot's raised hand stopped them for a heartbeat longer. He stooped, picked up the needle with a handkerchief, and held it up to the light. Again the courtesy, he said softly. A hidden sting delivered without mess. You intended to end the conversation neatly, monsieur? Bellamy's shoulders slumped, the polish finally flaking away. I never meant to kill him, he said hoarsely. Lionel was always theatrical. He drank, and he laughed. He'd survive. He always did. Poirot's voice was grave. When one plays with poisons, intentions are a luxury. The heart does not bargain. Mallory snapped the cuffs on. Bellamy did not resist. The folio was my father's, he said, bitterly. He kept it as insurance in a crooked world. When Lionel took it, he took our protection. I only meant to retrieve what was ours and silence him. I even returned the book. Is that not polite? Poirot met his eyes. Politeness without conscience is cruelty in gloves. Bellamy was led away, his elegance reduced to the clink of metal and the shuffle of feet. The room exhaled. Lady Veronica sank into a chair, her composure finally spent. Miss Brooks sobbed quietly, the sound of a storm breaking at last. Mallory cleared his throat. We'll take statements. Doctor, you're free to go for now. Aye, Colonel. Mrs. Ashcombe. You'll be needed. Poirot intervened gently. Inspector, one kindness, if you please. Mademoiselle Brooke acted under instruction and fear. She helped when it mattered. Mallory nodded. We'll note it. As the house began to empty of uniforms and murmurs, Poirot closed the folio and placed it on the table, not as a trophy, but as an object finished with. It will go to proper custody, he said. Secrets kept for leverage always ask interest. Lady Veronica looked up at him, eyes red but steady. My husband? Was he entirely wrong? Poirot considered. He wished to tidy his world at the end. That is human, but truth is not tidied by concealment. It must be faced. Outside, the rain had thinned to a polite drizzle, as if even the weather had decided to behave. Dawn hinted at the edges of the windows, but Poirot took his hat, adjusted his coat, and paused by the door. Hastings, he said, remember this affair when you admire good manners. They are a pleasure, yes, but they are not a virtue. He smiled, small and composed. Virtue requires courage, and courage is rarely polite. With that, Hercule Poirot stepped into the pale morning, leaving Ashcombe House to reckon with its reflections, while the little grey cells, satisfied at last, returned to their elegant rest.